Well, good morning, and welcome to the 4G World kickoff event. First of all, I want to thank you all for showing up this morning. I know many of you travel from far, and how many of you travel from the East Coast? Wow, a number. That's great. Thank you for making it. All the reports I'm getting from my team out there is things are calming down in Boston, New England. There's a few trees down in New Jersey, so it is settling down a bit, so that's great news to hear. I've got a big team out in the East Coast, so it's very, very important for us. So first of all, great event, and I want to share with you some of our thoughts around defining and disruptive forces shaping and reshaping mobile network economics. And as you know, mobile network economics continue to shift and continue to change, and it's really important for us to look at how far we've come already when we talk about 4G. This is, after all, a 4G World Conference, and let's talk about how far we've come. So how far have we come? Well, if you take a look, there are 351 operators in 104 countries now talking about LTE or 4G deployments. There are 105 commercial deployments worldwide in 48 countries already. Now, that's great news. The other thing that's going on is devices. Over the past year, we've seen a number of 4G or LTE devices come into the marketplace. The latest one with the iPhone 5. How many of you have your latest toy of iPhone 5 or a Samsung Galaxy S3? That's great, right? Works great, lovely. 5 million units sold just in the first weekend. Phenomenal amount of uptick and growth. Now, the other thing is there are 609 million subscribers forecasted by calendar year 16. A tremendous amount of growth and a tremendous amount of opportunity for all of us in the industry to make this happen. Now, a lot of still investments and trials going on in other parts of the world, and we're going to continue to see this go on. But if you step back and take a look at what drives mobile network economics, Burr said it best. It's really about the optimization and monetization. Why do we need to optimize? Well, unfortunately, the resources are always scarce. So if you look at the capacity and the coverage, it's really about how do we optimize the assets that we have in place and be able to leverage, make the most use of what we have. And the other thing is about driving top line or monetization with services. And we're going to cover each one of these topics briefly in my talk. Now, if you talk about capacity or coverage first to start with, LTE coverage has gotten out of the gate. All the operators are talking about how many towers and markets they have available. And that's the first game that happens. Even in 3G, the first battle was about coverage. And the way that I can describe that now is, you know, can you hear me now? And everyone remembers those ads, right? So coverage is the first thing that has to get into place. But coverage in LTE is never going to be ubiquitous in any place. If you look at some of the rural markets, some of the rural areas versus metro areas, there's going to be investment in certain parts of the country or cities, et cetera. And there's always going to be these gaps in coverage. So what is it that the operators need to do for coverage? Well, ubiquitous coverage is got to be provided, and all possible technologies have to get used. And there's a lot of talk about of why this ubiquitous coverage needs to happen. Let's take a look at some statistics. Cisco VNI report shows that 50% of the smartphones today already use Wi-Fi. Many of you walked into this convention center today, and Wi-Fi already probably kicked up in your smartphones or tablets, and you're using that right now. 70 to 80% of the users are nomadic, and I saw many of you in the back using your iPads and your laptops. And you know what? You're nomadic. You're sitting down in a place, and typically you're actually going to use Wi-Fi when you're out there. And 80% of the usage is typically, as I said, from an indoor location. And lastly, 19 out of the 20 smartphone users actually do use Wi-Fi as well. Now, if you take a look at some of the statistics on devices themselves, today, there are about 300 million devices in the US. Over 50% are smartphones or tablets. Now, the number of devices is growing rapidly. In fact, smartphones and tablets and laptops, the growth in those areas is about 40% based on some statistics from CTI and Nielsen Group, which is actually phenomenal over the past year, that much growth in these devices occurring. However, we're still at an early stage and an infancy stage of this area. So there's a lot of discussion about how we're going to provide this ubiquitous coverage. And as this ubiquitous coverage gets provided, many of the technologies that we're talking about, and there's a lot of discussion out there, and as I walk through the floor around small cells, unlicensed technology, Wi-Fi, 3G. There's going to be a ton of technologies that are going to be used to be able to basically provide that infill coverage between the macro towers and indoor coverage, because those are 2 or 3 key areas that have to be provided for a ubiquitous coverage. Why is this important? Well, for you and me as a user, as we travel, we're used to having very good phone coverage on our handsets. And as we do that, we want the same for data services. Now, for data services, as we move from place to place, indoor, outdoor, from trains to planes to automobiles, we want that seamless connectivity and be able to kind of build that platform where connectivity and seamless coverage and connectivity is provided as often as wherever it's needed. Now, next, let's talk about capacity. Now, capacity can be talked about in multiple contexts, right? There's a discussion around spectrum. There's never enough of it, right? And clearly, there's a lot of work being done in the US to figure out how we can find more spectrum and then give it out to folks. Leveraging unlicensed spectrum technology to be able to provide more data rates and coverage is also needed. But there's also things like Burj mentioned, backhaul. What happens in the core network? And many of those things occur. So for the topic of this conversation, let's leave spectrum aside. I'm sure that'll get covered in other folks. But let's talk about the other side of capacity that's required in a network. Now, in this capacity talk, let's talk about what are the things that are driving it. First of all, mobile data traffic growth. Everyone's seen the VNI data, 18x traffic growth occurring. Lots of traffic is going to be mobile data traffic in 2016. But let's look at some more statistics. There are about 700,000 iOS and 500,000 Android apps available in the application stores today. The number of devices that are downloading these apps has doubled in the past year. The number of application downloads has actually gone up from 55 million to about 102 million just in the past 12 months alone. Did you know what the largest application is? Anyone want to take a guess? What's the most popular application used today on smartphones? Facebook? Used to be Facebook. It actually changed from 2011 to 2012. YouTube? Actually, no, it's not. There's a gentleman in the back. Sorry? Google Maps. Google Maps is the highest used application today on smartphones. And it's actually quite interesting because there's some money discussions to be had there too about how Google is actually using Google Maps to be able to drive additional revenues by doing the click-to-call. And all of us use it to be able to get to maps and locations. So that is actually the largest application that's being used in smartphones. Now with the tablet industry, whether it's the plethora of tablets that are coming out, the bigger screens are actually changing the behavior and the usage of these devices as well, driving even more things. So what does all this mean and why is it important? Well, in the past, the applications that we had to worry about as network builders and infrastructure providers was voice and SMS. Now, as Burj talked about, a lot of these services, a lot of the usage is actually happening beyond the network. The destination is no longer people connecting to people with connections on the network. It's really people connecting to other things that are beyond the network. And what we have to do is enable those. But what we can't do is we can't control many of those things that occur. So all of these applications that we're talking about are creating havoc on the network, not just in data traffic, but also in other aspects with signaling traffic. So these applications like Angry Birds, for example, or other things that go on, are very chatty in the background. And in fact, we all talk about traffic growth, but there's also a tremendous amount of increase in signaling that we have to worry about. And signaling can happen not just with the applications, but also in this environment, the HetNet environment that we live in, where the user is going to move from 4G to 3G or 3G to 4G and IRAT-type signaling that occurs as well. So all of these things create that. Even some of the new services, for example, applications, while you're in mobile advertising in the applications is also going to drive some additional signaling traffic as well as you get more contextual and personalized services in the network. So all of this thing is driving tremendous amount of throughput growth because you've got video driving many of these data traffic things, but also all these applications driving tremendous amount of growth. So what does that mean for the network? Well, the network, it was very easy. I used to actually design networks many years ago. And it was very easy to predict how much traffic was going to go from where to where. And in that environment, you could easily sit down and design a predictable network that you knew where the sources of traffic were and where the sinks of traffic were. But now as we look ahead, the sources and sinks of traffic and the amount of traffic and the peaks and when the traffic occurs is really difficult to define. So what you've got now is multi-dimensional variables where you have to worry about not just the data throughput of these applications, but you have to worry about when these applications are going to come online and how many applications are going to be active at any given time, not just in real time, but also in the background. So the number of sessions that each device requires is going to be much more than a single voice or data or an SMS session. The transaction rate that's required for each of these applications could vary, depending upon the chattiness of those applications. And some of those things we may be able to control in the network, but certainly other things we may not be able to control in the network, and that's also going to have a tremendous impact on the network as well. So between all of these things, you have to be able to create an architecture from a network standpoint that's very elastic and is able to handle these different variations of traffic as they occur. So why? Because as we build out new services and as we build out new capacity in the network, we've got to be able to grow and grow easily and simply and fast. Because new services have to be coming up fast and move at an S-curve that's much different than typically what we've been used to in the industry as well. And we've got to be able to scale across all these dimensions seamlessly. And in fact, we've got to have elasticity in the network where at some points in the day, maybe your sessions go up, but your throughput is down. Or in other times of the day where throughput is up, when everyone's watching videos, perhaps but your sessions or transactions may be down. So all those things have to be accommodated by the same network, so elasticity becomes a very important aspect of the network. And now let's talk about services. Now, services is always a key thing because that's what drives money, right? But even services require optimization as well as monetization. So let's talk a little bit more about services now as well. Now, there was a report that came out a while back, and it was published in the Wall Street Journal, that today people spend more money on phone bills over the past 4 years. And they're more willing to cut back on other things, such as not going out for dinner, maybe not going to a movie, or something else, as opposed to losing their mobile data service, which is a pretty phenomenal change in the industry. Next thing is that data revenues have risen in data services, have grown over the past year. 23% growth in data service revenues over the past year. However, the data traffic growth is surpassing that. Just in the last 6 months alone, data point that I saw from CTI is 86% growth in the US in the past year, where the data service revenues in the US have grown only 23% over the past year. So what is driving this growth of data? Clearly, video continues to lead the industry, and we're seeing a 90% CAGR as part of the Cisco VNI. That video is driving the growth. We're also seeing a gaming and machine-to-machine being not too far behind. And all of these applications are also driving tremendous amount of data growth over the network. But as an industry, we've got to get a better handle on this, because unless we can align the revenue growth and the traffic growth closer together, this is going to be a challenge for us. And we've got to do a much better job of doing that. So how do we do that? Well, if you take a look at how we've actually built out the networks and what we built the networks for, the services have been typically on the network. But now we need to be thinking about mobility just not as a network, but really as a platform for innovation, and platform for innovation of services and value chains that haven't really existed on the network that need to come onto the network. So what do I mean by that? Well, up until now, we always talk about the network, and we will always talk about the network, but the network is a platform. Network is a fundamental platform. We've got to be able to extract that intelligence out of the network and be able to then analyze that information, whether it's user, location, context, personalization, information, take all of that intelligence out of the network and telemetry, and then use that in some way. And how do we use that in a way? Well, you've got to take that information and then apply it to some sort of a business rule. And the business rule may be something that's used to optimize user experience, or perhaps for a service that might be used to be able to offer. So policy, network, and analytics all have to work hand in hand. And now, elasticity in the network clearly allows us the dynamic nature that we need to fulfill. Analytics allows us to be able to take that information and parse it through, both around telemetry and user and application and destination. And then policy allows us to be able to control the resources in the network and perhaps apply it for more services. But again, mobility is going to be much more than just a network itself. It's going to be a platform for services innovation. And we've got to be able to drive that innovation and create new sources of revenues, not just from the user itself, but also on the other side with the B2B models that have often been talked about. So what does all this mean? Well, there are many different ways to be able to drive costs down and revenues up. And we've talked about a few of these briefly here today, but clearly cloud and network virtualization can also alter cost structures. Right? Cost structures are absolutely critical. Virtualization technologies that everyone's talking about, cloud as an element and how you deliver services from the cloud or what services get delivered from the cloud and how even using cloud infrastructure to be able to build those services is absolutely key. Taking those elements and applying the triangle of network, analytics, and policy and applying that intelligence allows us to be able to create these opportunities. And why is all this important? Well, if you're an operator, clearly you're focused on combining all of these capabilities to be able to help drive lower cost of ownership, to be able to build out new services and new revenue streams as quickly as possible, and also to be able to differentiate. Because as we look forward, between operators, there's got to be some differentiation as LTE flattens kind of the playing field across many of these areas. Now, it's all great. I know we're here talking about 4G, but I wanted to bring an example because this example, when leveraged properly, can actually demonstrate what some of these opportunities are that can be used. And interestingly enough, there's lots of 4G examples that everyone's going to use in this forum today. So I thought I'd maybe use something different. So I thought I'd use this example of Wi-Fi. Now, why is Wi-Fi important? Well, if you take a look at capacity, coverage, and services, right? Capacity and coverage, Wi-Fi is a very instrumental technology to be able to provide indoor coverage or coverage in very dense areas such as stadiums. And so what we've seen is we've actually seen some of these things prove out in Wi-Fi. A tier 1 operator that's deployed Wi-Fi, they've actually deployed it not just as a technology for capacity and coverage, but really as a platform for business innovation and services innovation. Now, what has Wi-Fi done for them? Well, for this operator, they've reduced churn by 15% by offering Wi-Fi to their end customers over an 18-month period. They've doubled their mobile advertising revenues by getting more targeted CPMs to those end users that are actually in that coverage area. And also, they've increased ARPU by $5.87. And this is actually happening now. And as we look ahead, the same construct that we talked about in terms of network, analytics, and policy, being able to apply that not just in a Wi-Fi context, but Wi-Fi in a 4G and a 3G context, bringing these together create a tremendous opportunity for us to be able to drive that. Now, why is this important? Clearly, drives the top-line side of the revenue side with services and additional ARPUs and mobile advertising revenues. But on the other side, it actually lowers customer churn, and the cost of customer acquisition is probably one of the critical things that we have to think about as an industry. But also, at the same time, it also helps improve the user experience by leveraging a technology where there may be some capacity constraints in a high, dense, or a venue-type environment. So lots of great stuff going on in the industry today, and clearly there's a lot more work to be done ahead. But the question is, where do we go from here, right? After all, there's only so many of us in the room. I see many of you having your iPads and your smartphones. So here's a question. How many of you have more than one device that you're carrying around today? Boy, is that it? I would have expected more. More than one. Well, that's at least more than half of you, right? I know I carry at least 2 and sometimes even 3 that are connected to the networks, right? Which is great. But at the end of the day, right, ones that, we're probably the crazy ones that have smartphones and tablets. There's a lot more folks that still need to get those technologies, and a lot is going on in the industry to make that possible, and it will continue to happen. But once we've got all the people connected, people are going to connect to each other, people are going to connect to information, everyone's going to get online, right? But that's not going to be enough, right? From there, we've got to move to what other opportunities exist. And frankly, if you take a look at what opportunities exist, after we've connected all the people together, there's going to be a lot more things to connect. And I know we talk a lot about Internet of Things. Well, let me pose to you that it's not about the Internet of Things, it's about the Internet of everything. Everything is going to be connected. And as everything gets connected, and there's going to be a lot of discussion on that here in the conference, as everything gets connected, we're going to see even more value chains. And the way that we're going to grow in this industry is that we're going to take value chains that have not been network-based and bring them onto the network. And as we do that, new services and new revenue opportunities are going to be created. And as we do that, more and more money is going to be made. Let me give you an example that we talked about earlier. If you take a look at advertising revenues, and this is just an example, if you take a look at print advertising revenues and the subscription rate, the penetration in print advertising revenues is very high. In mobile, while the penetration on mobility is high, mobile advertising, it's still a very low rate. So as we actually bring more things onto the networks, as we get more things connected to the network, we're actually going to get more value chains shifting from one part of how business gets done and how economic chains and value chains are realized to other ways of connected revenues and connected industries. And there's many examples that people have talked about, whether it's connected cars to connected propane tanks to connected meters. Many things are going to, and there's going to be more innovation that comes up. But it's really going to be about ecosystems that get created. Ecosystems that get created built on this platform that we're building called mobility, and new services and new opportunities are going to be realized off of this. Now, how is this going to be realized? Clearly, as we talked about virtualization, cloud, leveraging all of the network technologies that we build, as well as an ecosystem of partnerships that will get created between companies, service providers, and providers of services, and infrastructure providers, as well as perhaps others, will work together to make this possible. But it's really going to be about connecting the unconnected and enabling new value chains in the network as we go forward. So with that, the blueprint that we believe that's required to shape the network economics requires the three elements that we discussed. One is capacity, second is coverage, and the third is services. Between all of these three elements, we've got to be able to work together to figure out how they interact. And it's not going to be about one piece or the other. It's going to be a combination of all of those three things working together. We've got to work through many challenges as an industry. We've come a long ways, but we've got really a long ways to go still. And we're looking forward to working together with the operators that we've been working with already and continuing to do the great work that we have. But taking technologies such as small cells, taking the elastic network architecture, as well as cloud and virtualization technologies, and really building this elastic network is really going to be the way that we actually help the operators build this mobile platform for service innovation. So with that, I've saved some time for any questions that you might have. And I know that there's some microphones that have been set up in the aisles if anyone would like to engage in a conversation.
Microphones are right here. Can I ask the first question?
Please, Birch, go ahead.
So, you know, I started to lay the groundwork for your talk, and I think I did a reasonable job of talking about the dimensions of how you lay that foundation for profitability. And I think you've touched on just about all of them. The one I'm hoping you can give us a vision of is how does the operator know that this 4G engine is running properly, or whether he needs a tune-up? How does he know that the indicators, the dashboard, is telling them, you know, it's firing on all cylinders, not just, you know, feeling when he touches the gas pedal that it goes, but in fact knowing that he's at the right step in that process? How does he know?
That's a great question. And you know, it's quite interesting because while we've come a long ways in 4G, I think we have a long ways to go.
Tell me about it.
It's an ecosystem of different elements that we've pulled together. Everything from the spectrum, the devices, the backhaul, to the core network, beyond the core network to the policy framework, as well as billing frameworks. Many of these things, an IMS infrastructure, many of these things, you know, are going to we're going to find some interesting behaviors driven by the new applications and new techniques of the uses of the network. So I think that as an industry, we need to do a lot more in terms of proactive and reactive stuff. I think we all react very well as an industry, but the proactive monitoring of what behaviors are occurring and anticipating what those behaviors would mean in terms of the network are going to be absolutely critical. One of the key things is, you know, as we built out a lot of the large LTE networks and the core of those LTE networks, we've realized that the call flow models, for example, are much more complex than they have been in the past. And in fact, they're changing quite rapidly as well. And some of these call flow model expectations, whether it's things like IRAT, or perhaps the transactions per second rates, or other things that you might be expecting, are actually different. And these call flow model evolutions are changing quite rapidly, somewhat driven by A, the way the network is built out, but B, more importantly, by the uses of the network. So I think we're at a very early stage of being able to build those tools of A, looking at what's coming more proactively, anticipating, and getting ahead of what we might need to do yet.
Anybody else have a question? Come on up, take a mic.
Hi there.
Can you identify yourself, please?
Yeah, it's Josh Beck with Pacific Crest. So I heard you mention kind of small cells and Wi-Fi as kind of an integral part of the strategy to fill out the macro and the kind of home femto. So I'm just wondering if you could help us kind of flush out how big of an imperative that is, how important it is, how you see that playing out, and then also kind of what are the key adoption barriers that need to be overcome for Wi-Fi and small cell really to take off and complement the kind of 4G strategy. Thanks.
Sure. So as I was saying earlier, a lot of the data indicates that most of the usage of end users is actually when we're nomadic, high volume users is nomadic. And as you do that, there's typically a Wi-Fi network available. And if you take a look at where that Wi-Fi network exists, it's either in a home or in an office or in a complex venue. And that complex venue could be an airport, could be a train station, could be a mall, could be a stadium, et cetera. We've actually seen some really interesting behaviors. As you know, we've done a few of the Super Bowls over the past few years and work with our operator partners to be able to provide Wi-Fi coverage for those. And as we looked at some of the statistics, we actually see some interesting behavior where the traffic patterns are quite different than what you would expect in a stadium. A lot more upload than there is download, as an example, and so on and so forth. So as you look at what that requires, and as you look at what you might need to do, first thing you need to do is identify where you might need to focus some of these technologies. So for example, indoor coverage, high-speed data, Wi-Fi may be better suited, along with perhaps some licensed technology as well. So converged licensed and unlicensed technologies is one trend that we're seeing in the industry. Second thing is that as you do that, that's actually quite relevant to be able to look at also backhaul costs, right? Because if you look at outdoor cells that are being deployed, the first thing that operators actually talk to us about is, how are you going to help me with my backhaul costs? Because backhaul is a huge part of the expense that I've got to worry about, especially when I don't own the infrastructure myself, right? I've got to go procure it from someone. And even if I do own the infrastructure, I've got to pay a different group to get that backhaul from. So backhaul economics have to get addressed. So those are two key elements, which is one, where it's being deployed and where the highest interest is actually on the indoor side and some of the complex venues. And the second thing is, the most interesting thing that operators bring up when they talk about small cells is the backhaul expense. And the third thing is really integration with the rest of the macro network, which is how do I take all this traffic and perhaps be able to bring the knowledge of the user and the subscriber and perhaps the billing information, no matter where they're coming in from, and aggregate that with the rest of my mobile infrastructure so I can have a single policy for that user, no matter which way they're connecting into the network. Okay?
Any other questions?
Hi. So my name is Bill Farkas, and I'm from Sheridan Institute of Technology in Toronto. And I wonder if you could help me understand better the idea of network as platform. And it almost sounds as if we're crossing into network neutrality territory, an issue raised yesterday. So it'd be great if you give it a bit of tangibility.
Great. Well, from a fellow Canadian, thank you, Bill, for that question. The network as a platform network has always been a platform. Network has always been a platform for innovations and continues to be. Up until now, the innovations have actually occurred in the network for services that started and ended in the network. Right now, as we look at services of the future, a lot of those services aren't going to be limited to what we do inside the network by itself. It's actually going to be services that exist in the network and services that perhaps need to get integrated with the network. So to me, network has always been a platform. As we did voice services and data services, there was a lot of enhancements that we did to the network to be able to make those work better together. Even in mobility, the network has been pretty complex and sophisticated.
But I was thinking, you sort of suggested in the context of a business model. I think you were talking about profitability of the system.
Absolutely.
And you started out with a 23% increase in revenue.
Yes.
And 80% increase in traffic loads.
Yes.
And the idea of making profit, and I think that's how the morning started. We're talking about making profit from 4G. So, you know, network as platform sort of suggests now that this is going to become core to the business model.
Actually, mobility is a platform, not just network. That was my point. Okay. And mobility is a platform for innovation. Why? Because we've looked at mobility as being a network by itself. But as we look forward, mobility is not going to be a network by itself. Mobility is going to be a platform on which you actually deliver services. And some of those services, the operator is going to build themselves, and they're going to charge the users for. But some of those services, there'll be other people that'll have to pay for those services being delivered. We've heard of many contexts, such as, you know, in the voice world, we did 1-800 numbers, right? The same type of contexts are starting to pop up in the data world as well, which is, can an advertiser pay for their ad to be delivered to an end user without the user being charged for those data bits that they're actually being receiving? So many of those types of models will come up. I am conscious of the time, so maybe it's a longer conversation, Bill, that you and I can have afterwards. But I want to make sure that the organizers get back to this.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Kelly.
Thank you very much.
Good job.